All right. I am so happy to welcome to the program for the first time, actually the second time, because we stopped this Mercury retrograde style to do something we forgot to do. But that being said, Mercurius George, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I came across Mercurius, aka Jared. I love a good pseudonym. We were talking about this earlier, so I will ask you about that in your little bio that I force you to give me. I force all guests to give me at the beginning of a program. Um, but I met Jared via the interwebs, via Spencer Michaud, who's a good buddy of mine. We share Spencer in common, right?
hmm Yeah, well,
Yeah,
we're all music and astrology people,
that's right.
and I'm
It's a
Spencer's an old friend, and as I was explaining before we started, he's been kind of my gateway drug to astrology in a lot of ways over the years.
it's a healthy gateway drug.
Yeah,
Get you into the practice that consumes you for the rest of your days.
absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Well, Jared is with me here today to talk about Gemini season 2022. We have made it through eclipses. Not actually in this moment because we're we're recording a few days before the lunar eclipse happens. So we're
Mhm.
kind of in the hot pocket of energy right now, but we are going to be talking about Gemini season here today. But before we get started, I'm curious. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so my name's Jared. I don't usually share my last name. I kind of stumbled into this bizarre and silly pseudonym because I started an astrology Twitter account just because was learning so much and I had so many thoughts and so much to say that I just had to do it. And I ended up kind of stumbling into an astrology practice in a much more significant way than I ever intended or expected. Like you said, it just consumes you especially once you start really learning the details. So I do readings, and I don't produce a lot of content on the internet or teach or anything like that, except just like rambling on Twitter. Um, but I would say my practice is grounded in Hellenistic astrology, first and foremost, though I'm not the type of person to walk around like quoting Dorotheus. Um, More so, I feel like I've been privileged to learn the techniques of ancient astrology from people who really figured it out. So maybe when I'm less distracted in 10 years, I'll be more in the weeds with some of the origins of that stuff. But and then, as anybody who's alive in the 21st century is inevitably going to also be, I'm influenced by, modern and psychological astrology because it's just in the air, it pervades. And I think that's a good thing. I don't use all of it, you know. I would say that's my basic. uh,
Well, I love that. I don't use all of it because that is the that I feel like that is the luxury, but also maybe sometimes the difficulty of being an astrologer in this day and age is we have so much to pick from to create a practice. And then you really, and that's what you have to do. You literally have to practice so that you
right.
figure out which techniques work for you and they speak for you. They speak through your clients, they speak through, mundane predictions, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very privileged in that regard to have so many techniques to pick through, but it can be overwhelming. I saw a little meme that's been going around. I don't know if you've seen this with the like astrology iceberg.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, and it has like at the top of the iceberg, it's like sun signs and this and that. And at the bottom, it's like the most complex, you know, techniques out there. And the funny thing is the first one that I saw was like the picture was so detail, there was so many on it, like I had to like zoom in, like even these
Yeah.
big glasses couldn't take it in. I'm like, what does that say, what does that say? And then I had a friend, and it was detailed, and then I had a friend send me another one like with a little lol, like look at this. And the bottom layer of that iceberg was like equivalent to the middle layer of the previous one that I had
Mhm.
seen. So I'm just
Wow.
it's funny, it's funny. I
I
think.
love I love that image. My favorite detail was at the top it says something like lying to your friends about what you believe to, not be weird or something like that. And then at the very, very, very bottom, it says lying to your friends about what you believe to keep them safe. Somebody, I mean, I joked about that online, and then somebody was like, "What does that really mean?" I was like, "Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's not that serious, or is it?" Right?
Or is
Uh,
it, keep them guessing or not, you
I
know.
said, the terrifying power and accuracy of zodiacal releasing was my
Ah,
answer. You got to
I
keep people
know.
safe from that. There's, sometimes there's something to be said for gatekeeping. Not because you're
Sometimes.
trying to be, not because you're trying to be, in control, but because, not everything should be approached without some caution and without a lot of like foundation to work with it. And
I
some things like zodiacal releasing can really mess with your head.
It
All
can.
you have
You
to do
like
is glance
look at
at it.
a snapshot of your whole life for potential, or these hard and
Yeah.
fast rules that can be put on things too. I mean, and that's kind of the it's where Hellenistic astrology as a whole kind of is
Yeah.
interesting, because it can be when you get into like life, zodiacal releasing, or the way that like triplicity rulers are doled out through your lifespan, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my god, my worst planet is like the end of my life. And if you're anyone who's prone to anxiety, if you're
Mhm.
anybody who has strong Gemini or Virgo placements,
Hmm.
perhaps you might want to pull back and curb that a little bit, because like you said, it's yeah.
My life is a constant battle between the Virgo anxiety and the Scorpio need to know.
And then you'll have anxiety if you don't know. And if you do know, you'll have anxiety too, because now you know.
Yep.
And then there's just that many more questions. Um, oh my God. And speaking of questions, I was thinking about this with Gemini energy coming up I'm like, oh, let me think about Gemini. I'm like, let me think about Gemini. This is Mercury's season, essentially one of two, but this is the mercurial season that is more aligned with air and conceptual, and like the in many ways in my mind, like the birth of thought, or the complexities of thought and thinking and perceptions and analysis.
Hmm.
And I was like, what is the biggest thing about Gemini? And I was like, why? Because Gemini is the why. Gemini is the question. Gemini, like I did like an event the other day for a birthday party, and I was reading tarot for some people. And this little boy sat down with me. He's like 7 years old. I have never encountered so many whys. Like everything I said had a why did that then? Why did that? Why did that? And I'm like, I know this is natural maybe for this age, but I'm like, when's your birthday? And sure enough, it was like early June. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
oh, yes, the Gemini.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because if you think about, what stage of life does Mercury correspond to, it would certainly
True.
be that that age. I don't know exactly where it is, but probably between like 5 and 7, where that's like a natural stage of the development of the brain. You don't even, and part of it is that a kid at that age doesn't have the social awareness to realize how annoying it is to keep saying why. That comes later, right? So they literally just want to know why, and you tell them, okay, but why that? Okay, but why that? Um, and
Yeah.
there's something. Gemini is not. I wouldn't call it persistent, because it's not in the sense of like a fixed sign, not like
Mm.
Taurus, but it's persistent in its curiosity. It just keeps coming.
It keeps coming. It's like persistent in the sense that the curiosity continues to meander, and
Right.
and like it's a never-ending
Yeah,
train of
never
like
stop.
the mutable back and forth, the transition of it. And the funniest question he asked me was, he's like, why do you do this? And I was like, I ask myself that every day. And it was cute. And then yeah,
This
but
being astrology?
I think he was talking about tarot,
Oh,
because he was
okay.
trying to understand it. Like he's like, why are all these people sitting with her? Why are they? Why
Oh,
like?
wow.
Why did I have like a little setup too? And I had some like little accoutrements with some cute little crystals and stuff like that, and like young kids, including this young kid, 42 years young. I love shiny things, and so just being attracted to it, and this kid's trying to figure out like who is this person? What are they doing? Why do you do this? Like what benefit, like what's the reason behind it? And and I feel like, I mean, that's another word we can loop in here too, is reasoning. Because I feel like that's a strong characteristic of Gemini too, like trying to reason things, trying to gain the reason why, and that reason shifts. Like we think about, I saw another little, I was watching a program last night, actually. I keep getting I must be around all these like inquisitive kids, because it was a program where the little kid she was like 3 years old, and she had cut her hair. And her mom
Mhm.
was like, what happened to your hair? And like, you cut off the base. And she's like, I didn't cut my hair. I didn't have scissors. Like, and so she had to like and then they go into the bathroom, they find the scissors, they find the hair, and she had to sit down, her children, and she's like, who can tell me what a lie is? And they're just like, oh, when it's their explanations were hilarious, but basically she was like, it's when you don't tell the truth. And
Is this
lies,
anecdote meant to comment on Gemini season here in some way?
in some way. And I was like, is
In
this
some
little girl Gemini? Because that's the thing with, that's the tricky thing about Gemini energy, is like lies are subjective, I suppose.
Yeah, well, the it's such a playful sign, right? It's such a
Yeah.
playful energy. So, and it's playing with information, right? It's like, what if you put things this way? What if you put things that way? Um, it's kind of, the truth is kind of an experiment or an
Mm,
exploration with Gemini, which, I don't think it's necessarily always going to go to such extremes as perhaps like a certain former president, um, but
that
it
guy.
is possible.
It is possible. It's like I had a partner who was a Gemini rising for many years, and I was always like, I just like, one day this is this, and the other next day this is totally something. Oh, I don't even remember saying that, or I don't know. Like it's just funny. I feel like the way that just the mind shifts and moves, and um is not static in any way, shape, or form, or introduces new information. Like you said, new information comes in, and then it's just easy for that perception or the idea, or just whatever you're attached to intellectually, it just switches. And yeah, and maybe that's part of the trickster mentality, right? Because we think about Mercury uh being more of trickster energy, because it's playful, because it
Yeah,
kind of skips
absolutely.
to its own beat.
I think that really characterizes, something, because something that I find really interesting is that Mercury rules two mutable signs, right? Virgo and Gemini, which means they're in this square relationship. And I feel like that is really the difference between Gemini and Virgo. Gemini is like, stop taking everything so seriously. And Virgo is like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I have to get, I have to really like shut out all distractions so I can focus and just get the facts, figure out what's objective. And Gemini is just Mercury's playground,
Mm,
where in Virgo, it's not, Virgo is fun.
yeah.
I'm not here for any Virgo slander, but it's not, Virgo has Virgo as a sign, but planets in Virgo have a job to do. They feel a sense of responsibility. And in Gemini, I just think that there's a lot less of that, you know?
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, we're talking about earth versus air. These
Yeah.
are literally, they're opposite,
Yeah.
energies. They are about as opposite as you get, much like fire and water. They have this, they're just
hmm
different. And
And
Mercury dances in both playgrounds.
yeah, but this axis of Gemini to Sagittarius is really very much like the freedom axis,
Hmm.
fire and air expressions of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, Gemini doesn't like to be beholden to things. Wants to go where it wants to go as
Mm,
freely as possible.
I get it. I'm like, I'm ruled, my chart is ruled by a Mars and Gemini. I'm like, I've had to curb that in
Yeah, and my
over the years.
midheaven is in Gemini.
Oh yeah, it's so interesting. That this is for all you mutable signs out there rising. It's like most of the time your angles are all in either Mercury or Jupiter ruled terrain, and so I don't know. I don't know if you have any insight to share to share about that, but I find it kind of it's like the only placement that kind of does that.
Yeah, I that's me. I would say that it's like the things that your life are rooted in tend to be more in flux than they might be for other people. Um, and I'm sure that and obviously that will play out very differently in different charts, and
Yeah.
maybe you'll have a stellium and a fixed sign, right? But which I guess I do. Um, but there is that, yeah, there's a certain kind of playfulness to all those angles, and a flexibility and adaptability, but also an instability and
Yeah, and
inconsistency.
it's interesting because some people like jive with it and they like it, and then other times I'll like consult people that have these placements and they're like, can I just stop moving, please? Can I, like they're like, everything is always just one, I have it for this long and then it moves along. Um and I think that's another thing with Mercury when we think about Mercury as a planet and Gemini energy is things are on the go. Like there's not a stasis here. It's like there's busyness, there's movement. There's just what's next. Keep it coming, like so
Mm.
I always imagine this being a very busy time of the year to move through.
Yeah, definitely.
So that being said, so we are switching focus to Mercury. If you can't tell, we've already been talking about Mercury for so long here. And to mutable air. And of course, when we're in Gemini season, we got to know what Mercury is going to be doing, because what Mercury is doing is essentially laying the foundation of sorts for the sun's movements through, this 30-day period through Gemini that starts on Friday, May 20th. If you're wondering, when does Gemini begin? And this year we have Gemini energy filtering through Mercury retrograde, who happens to be in Gemini at the very start of it, but will retrograde back into Taurus. And so we have an interesting Gemini period where half of it has Mercury retrograde. So any thoughts on that, Jared? What that might bring?
Yeah, well, it divides the month into a few different sections. There's Mercury retrograde in Gemini, Mercury retrograde in Taurus, Mercury direct in Taurus, and then back into Gemini again. And the first period lasts for like a day, right?
I know it's like,
Something
but it's
like
a
that.
very impactful
Yeah.
one.
So I think it's going to be interesting because I wonder if I feel like this might be experienced as a kind of tension. There's like, the sun is trying to do its thing in Gemini. It's trying to have that sort of movement and flexibility, but it's going to be subject to Mercury's whims, which are, you know, caught up in something else and kind of looking backwards. Um,
Mm.
but I think mostly I just think of it as, um, sorry, there's all these sirens and so many noises.
It's Mercury speaking.
We're conjuring Mercury so much, and you're hearing those city noises. Um, so yeah, I just think it's gonna be very different at different moments.
Mm, it's yes. And I guess we could say that about any,
Sure.
Gemini season. But there's something to be said about different at different moments, but different coming from maybe even like different timeline angles, like in the idea of that we are, essentially the mind is still moving backwards. It still is in processing state. There could be unfinished business and details and conversations and all these things that are just not moving forward yet. And I mean, this is part of Mercury's retrograde cycle, but it's also when it seeds back in with the sun, which is at the beginning of Gemini season, which we'll talk about here shortly. It's interesting, we're rolling back over through things, but at the same time we're starting a whole new layer of what Mercury's movements are going to be for, through the end of September basically.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of behind the scenes action, there's a lot of things to still sort out, there's a lot of inspirations to come in, and it seems like really potent timing when we just think about it, because we're moving out of the eclipse shifts, right? Gemini season comes, and usually this is the time where we entertain new information. There's a lot of talking heads going on. The world's going to be chattering about all types of things, because when it's Gemini season, it's like news media. If it's not already on 10, it's going to turn to 11, because that's just the way it goes. But we're kind of living in this very new space, with the eclipses having taken place. Jupiter's getting situated in Aries, which is a whole new landscape to navigate.
Mhm.
And Mars is about to activate that placement too, which we'll talk about with it moving into Aries too. So there's a whole different dynamic, and I feel like most of this season is going to be maybe just intellectually sorting it out, like where we're
That
at.
makes sense. Well, there's a lot to process.
Yes.
There's been a lot of change that's come kind of suddenly. And, as we're recording this, some of it certainly has not happened yet. Um, and some of it will take a lot of time to play out. Like the eclipses are still very fresh at the beginning of Gemini season. I think the sun moves into Gemini 4 days after the lunar eclipse. And, that might, the eclipse, whatever the story is in an individual life and in the collective, it might be somewhat clear 4 days after, but there's a lot more to it, I'm sure. There
Yeah.
might be some things that we're able to identify at that point, personally and collectively. But, you're looking at months of story that's going to play out, and it's going to hit different sort of pivot points. So I think this is like the first attempt to start, as you said, intellectualizing and just kind of thinking through and categorizing the various shifts that have taken place with ingresses and eclipses and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it helps having just Mercury being retrograde, and the fact that it stations direct on, like pretty much on the eclipse point. So
Yeah.
to, back up what you just said, I think that absolutely there's going to be catch up time, and there's there's this whole storyline that is being written. I think about Mercury and Gemini, and it is like, it's the written word. It's like literally putting it to paper. It's coming out. This is the place where it's kind of born, in a sense. And I think it helps to have Mercury in this part of its cycle that it's in, because the sun is essentially preceding it
Hmm.
through the zodiac space. It's almost like the sun takes it in before Mercury is going to meet it there,
Hmm.
being in its um the phase that it's in now.
Yeah. Once it
Yeah.
crosses that conjunction, then it starts moving into its more Eastern rising phase, which is interesting because once it stations direct, it's going to have, and then eventually at the end of the month, or I'm sorry, the end of Gemini season, it will move back into Gemini. And now it'll be this morning rising Gemini, I mean, Mercury. Ah. And it's just like a very different energy, and I think that's going to feel really nice after the retrograde. It's not only direct, but it's going to be in its home sign. It's got this sort of like rise and shine morning person
Yeah.
attitude. It's going to be a very active Mercury after the very kind of, after all the obstacles and setbacks and review that it's going into now as
Yeah.
we're recording.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think by the time that happens, a lot is going to speed up. I feel like there's going to be just a speeding up of and to enjoy your time processing it all now and working out the kinks and get
Right.
strategies and getting plans in place. And yeah, so sort it out now, because I think when we do get to that phase, it's just going to be, like it's go time to some
Yeah.
extent, especially with all that Aries that's going to be taking place. Another interesting thing about this season too is we're getting to a point where all these outer planets, Saturn and Neptune and even Pluto, there are all, kind of hovering around the same degree. Saturn, Neptune in particular, it's kind of hovering around this like 24-degree point. And so we get these interesting like planetary activations where there will be like a trine to Saturn and a square to Neptune, or there'll
Hmm.
be um I'm like, do a square to Saturn and a sextile to Neptune. And I don't know, just thinking about those two planets together, it's like an interesting
Yeah.
filter to go through. Any thoughts on like especially Saturn and Neptune? Like,
Well, I was thinking about kind of, I was thinking this through, and I noticed that first of all, when Mercury, we'll get to this, but when Mercury has its direct station in late Taurus, it's going to be aspecting all three of those planets,
yeah,
Neptune, Saturn, and Pluto at the same
yeah,
time. Which, so then also when the moon passes through Taurus and Scorpio, it makes aspects to all three of those planets at the same time. Um, and I mean, I feel like I'll probably bring this up again later, but that area of like 25 degrees
mm-hmm.
there have been so many different hits to planets or to that territory of about 25 to 27 degrees of various signs in the past year or so, um, particularly for earth and water signs. So there's just, I don't know, it's just something that seems to keep coming up. And it's like we're tying together Neptune, Saturn, and Pluto in those moments, and it's like the planet of boundaries and concrete reality, and then the planet of lack of boundaries
But
and
it's
total
in concrete.
dissociation,
Yeah.
lack of concrete anything, and then the planet Pluto, which is like exists beyond that dichotomy, right? It's like that. It's like the even further out space that's sort of like just like the underworld. And that's just like a very heady and strange
It's a strange place.
combination. So it's pretty hard to delineate what does it look like when when you combine
It's like
Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto in
it's
that
like
sense.
it's like the world, like the physical world is changing into a surreal reality. Is
Right.
like what like it kind of feels like to me. It's like and it does, we see these, especially with the conflicts that are going on now, and we're seeing changes and rollbacks, and like how is the world changing in this way? Like we felt like this doesn't seem
Hmm.
real, you know and that could just be like moving out of Jupiter Neptune territory and all the Pisces that has been happening. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be part of it. But there's also the creative element of Neptune too, where it's a different type of manifesting some sort of like creative impulse that can rise from that to then be stabilized and conceptualized and strategized. So it does have those, it has those perks, but it's just strange energy. And I haven't seen anything like it before. So I just kind of wanted to point it out and
Yeah.
be like, let's study it. Let's
I
figure it
think
out.
that's sometimes that's the best we can do. Like is just flag something. This is worth observing, you know. What does this feel like? We'll see. We can kind of try to guess, but mostly it's just going to be interesting to see.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's a very Gemini attitude, though.
Well, and that's the attitude we're going to take here today,
Yeah.
because you know what? It's good to say, I don't know. I don't know. And anybody who says that they do, they definitely don't. So, just keep that in mind. So, all right. Well, let's get into our kind of play by play here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if you are watching this via the YouTubes. Um, we have move this. Now I got to dance my whole screen around so I can see everything I got going on. But all right, so here we have Gemini season kicking off. Of course, I'm always doing things by Pacific time because that's where I am in California. May 20th, 2022 at 6:22 p.m. Pacific. And if you're looking at the chart or you're hearing us talk right now, the most obvious thing taking place is this Mercury Sun Conjunction that is basically happening the next day on May 21st, that weekend on Saturday. But you also see that Mercury has just moved off a sextile to Jupiter, and really the first planet to other than the moon making an aspect, the first planet to contact Jupiter now in
Hmm.
Aries too. So how about Gemini season starting with a Mercury Sun inferior Cazimi? It doesn't get much more
Yeah.
heady than that.
Yeah, it feels like Gemini season is going to be really funny because it's going to really announce itself like Gemini, very, very kind of loud. And then so quickly that will change.
Yeah.
You get this moment of like, of just very pure mercurial energy, Mercury in the heart of the sun, and that the clarity of that moment. Now it's still the middle of the Mercury retrograde, so it's a relative clarity. It's clarity relative to the confusion you're otherwise experiencing,
Experiencing.
And I think it's easier seen in narratives. And personally, I don't always see it. I don't always have it, that experience on a Mercury can see me. But oftentimes it does feel like that day is just like a break in the clouds. And I think it might be like that.
Yeah, I think so because that's an interesting thing about this Mercury retrograde too, having it retrograde through its own sign is,
Mhm.
there have been little delays and stuff here and there, or like mechanical breakdowns. Like, last week I had to get a new battery for my car because I got in and,
Mm.
all of a sudden it wouldn't start. And I'm like, oh, Mercury.
Mm.
But there's other parts that have come together like so fast,
Yeah.
that weren't quite expected and kind of came out of the blue, and like, I just had to rush to get something done, and it actually went pretty seamlessly, but I wasn't, calculating for that, and it just happened and we did that. Or like a rush of inspiration with ideas that I like went inside with and spent some time with, and so I feel like it's going to be, especially at 0 degrees of Gemini, because that is where the actual conjunction will take place. And, zero, just as in general, it's a birthing degree of any sign.
Yeah.
There's just brand new energy there. And why maybe when we're talking about like the outer planets being at these like closer to n degrees, and there's all this like stuff that's
Yeah.
been coming up, and I don't know, navigating old issues and things like that. Like, this feels different to me, as if there's just fresh ideas, fresh energy coming up, fresh transmissions, communications. I feel like a lot of stuff comes together just vocally, or through your, getting phone calls, texts, emails, etc., that just
Mhm.
paint, a new road, or transition it in some way.
Yeah. To jump into something you were talking about, I too have found that this Mercury retrograde so far, while it's been in, while Mercury is in Gemini, I found it to be really fascinating because I'm getting this sort of like life is throwing sort of trickstery obstacles in my path, but
Mhm.
but then they resolve really fast and
Yeah.
easily. So they're not like nothing has happened where I've gotten like where it's driven me totally insane. There was one day where I was a little bit, I had like two car like Ubers cancel on me in a row and make me late and all this stuff. But it was fine, right? Everything was fine. But there has been this sense of like speed to everything. Like
Yeah.
since Mercury went retrograde, despite the fact that this is a very slow Mercury that we've been living with, it has the the quality of speed of its zodiacal position, right? And
Yeah.
it's like because this is also Mercury's bound,
That's
you
true.
know. The station degree was 4, I believe, or 5,
Mm-hmm.
4. So this whole time period that Mercury is in Gemini before it regresses back into Taurus, it's in its own bound. And yeah, it's just very zippy, but also very crazy, you know?
Zippy and crazy, just how Mercury likes it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting, having a couple Ubers cancel on you, and like deep down, like you
I know it's going to be
expect that,
fine. And I knew it
it's
was
gonna
going to
be
happen.
fine, and it's gonna happen at the same
Yeah.
time. It's like you can account for it. And then it's just all about how you think about it at that point, right? It's like, how do you choose
Yes.
to then process it? But yeah, I've been
That's the
having
benefit of
so
astrology is
yeah, true.
you actually, because there are moments in life where you can, decide what attitude to take when something comes up, something you weren't expecting or something that you didn't want. And your attitude is going to really affect your experience, but it won't control the outcome, but it will affect your experience of going through that, how you
Yeah,
experience the experience.
absolutely. The very cliche term, the of the your perception is your reality. Like
Yeah.
this is Gemini, so keep that
Hmm.
in your back pocket forever because it does apply. But I've been having so many dreams about like car issues and travel and like trying to get places, and I had a dream last night where I had like flat tires, but then I got new tires and someone was supposed to help me tow the car, but then we got to the place and I'm like, you didn't help me tow the car, we have the tires but not the car, like. So I'm like, I was trying to get to a place. I'm like, why are my dreams always stressful? Like I dream every night and I dream very vividly, and I'm like, why can't I get one of those dreams like that I'm like sailing on a magical unicorn or something, like that. I'm always like having to deal with something in dreams, and a lot of
Yeah.
times, yeah. So I don't know if
Well,
anybody
it's
else out
it's a
there.
stressful time of
It is.
to be
It is.
alive. It's also we're also right in the middle of between eclipses at this moment.
I know. I know. But I just want to I want to break. Let me
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So there you have it. We start off Gemini season with sort of a mercurial bang, so to speak. But I think that clarity that can come, like I love how you put it, Jared, like just clarity in that moment, and might not be the ultimate clarity, but it's like the best clarity you got
Hmm.
in that time frame. And we got to think about it in context too, because I mean, look at Mars and Neptune still kind of sitting together,
Hmm.
like coming off an eclipse, on just 5 days earlier, and then having this whole week of Mars Neptune. Like I think that there's there's got to be just a lot of like interesting processing, and not even having a whole lot of energy, but also having a really like active headspace. And so it's just a weird vibe.
Yeah.
I think that leads up to this. So getting that clarity, or just getting that aha, or getting that message you've been waiting for, I think is
Yeah,
really good.
and
Good.
with the Jupiter sextile, I think
Yes.
it's interesting because Jupiter at this point is still ruled by, as you pointed out, Mars and Pisces conjunct Neptune. So Jupiter is there's a lot of like maybe desire to start some things, to get some things going. Maybe it's a little cloudy though at this point. And I think knowing that Mercury has already, made a sextile to Jupiter before this, I guess at that point in a different sign, but still, um, this is the second one, and then it's going to make another sextile in Gemini. The third one is going to be the least, um, you know, it's going to be the cleanest one, I think,
Yes.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a time probably for bubbling thoughts and ideas, and maybe excitement and enthusiasm, maybe starting things, but maybe with the knowledge that that Mercury Jupiter enthusiasm and the assistance from Jupiter is going to you're going to get a better version of that in a few weeks.
in a few weeks. Yeah. So it's like hang in there. Or not even hang in there, like entertain.
Yeah, exactly. Entertain the
Yeah,
ideas.
entertain
Yeah.
the ideas. And then there's just going to be more fire and more juice and more like outward, quicker movement once, Mars, Jupiter have a conjunction, Mercury sextiles those planets. And then there's kind of like more go time there. But until then, it's like a lot of maybe conceptualization. It's like feeling like those urges brewing, but there's still, things to wrap up. Or I mean, to be like, as you just reminded me during my my dream lament, is that we're in eclipse season. If any,
Hmm.
this is the time that things change.
Hmm.
So having these kind of fresh energies that are on the brew, life changes taking place, instigating change of sorts, because that is essentially what, Aries rises to the challenge of like newness and freshness in life. And depending on what the eclipses have delivered you, in
Hmm.
any way, shape, or form that might be needed to develop, write that next chapter, um, and have that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, entertain it during
I really like
May
that.
20th, 21st. So, all right, what's next? So we go through a last quarter in Pisces. So that's interesting. So we're moving into a lunar cycle where we're going to have all mutable activation. So we're going to have the Pisces last quarter, the Gemini new moon, um, Virgo first quarter, and then Sagittarius full moon. And so I feel like this is always a time, when you get mutable activations and especially lunar quarters, it's like things be shifting, things are moving. So I don't know if you have any insights into maybe a last quarter in Pisces or just mutable, lunations just in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's the last quarter, but of this eclipse season. So,
Yes.
right, so it's kind of that's still playing out. Like we're still in eclipse weirdness until the new moon, and then we're still dealing with whatever the eclipse has brought. Um, but that's how I view this last quarter moon as being,
Yeah.
that's the cycle that we're moving into the close of. So usually at last quarter moon, right, you're kind of, it's like, okay, we have to wrap up this round of things to get ready for the next round of things. And in this case, it's like you're not running the show. Um, whatever's being wrapped up is wrapping itself up, and you just gotta surrender or hold on tight, whatever your coping mechanism is. You know, so
Yeah.
that's what it makes me think about.
I could totally see that, just with it being in Pisces, first off,
That's
and the
true.
fact that Pisces has been so dominant in this eclipse season, with both of the rulers of each eclipse, the solar and the lunar eclipse
Right.
being in Pisces, having having this last quarter, like revisit this zone. And as you said, like kind of maybe surrender to it, let go to it, hold as much as you can, but know that it is a rushing transition of water, like it has that almost that a waterfall effect in my in my mind. So it could be, you could be processing emotions at this time. Pisces does tend to bring us to emotional places, but it'll be just an interesting an interesting weekend. Basically, once Gemini season starts, we have that Mercury Kazemi, and then on Sunday we have this Pisces last quarter, just kind of like carrying us into this emotional space where there might just be some emotional processing that
Yeah.
needs to happen for all that. So hang in there, hold tight. um but behind the scenes, not really behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, we have this all new journey that is involving Mercury, Mars, and Pluto that is going on. So there's actually a lot of action that is
Hmm.
happening between the last quarter phase in Pisces to the new moon in Gemini on Monday, May 30th. So basically, from May 22nd to May 30th, there's a lot of action in the skies that is kind of prepping us for this new moon. And one of the things that is going to be configuring in a multi aspect configuration is Mercury, Mars, and Pluto having their story. So what happens is Mars and Mercury sextile right after Mercury moves back into Taurus. And then, so they, oh, wait, no, first Mars, okay, come on, back
Mars
it up,
sextile
Mel.
Pluto.
Mars is going to sextile Pluto here on, I think Sunday, Monday, more Monday, because we're gonna have the moon light that up in late degrees of Pisces. Monday or
Mm.
early Tuesday, we have this Mars sextile to Pluto. Then Mercury moves back into Taurus, and then Mercury moves to sextile Mars at like the anaretic 29th degree of both Taurus and Pisces. Mars then moves into Aries, which is big news, big news. And then Mars makes or no, sorry, Mercury retrograde, then trines Pluto. A lot going on. A lot going on. So, what do we even think about with just those planets interacting as like a whole?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think we got to break it down into pieces. So we
We
have,
do.
you know,
So, Mars,
Mars,
Pluto.
Mars, Pluto. We we recently, it wasn't that long ago we had the Mars Pluto conjunction, right? But anyway.
I'm like, that's right, because that was Mars, Venus, Pluto all hanging out
Yeah, I feel like
together.
things have been moving quickly, but um, there's
So that was
Mars,
late
Pluto.
February, early March. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. What draws my attention to this, and this is just one little detail, um, is I'm thinking about this last decan of Pisces, which
Mm.
is a Mars ruled decan. So Mars is in its own, little slice of Pisces, and it's all the themes about this decan are about kind of giving it your all and about sacrifice in pursuit of some extremely lofty vision, which is kind of a dangerous game.
Mm.
That's the message of the Decan basically is like it's an all or nothing type of sacrifice, and I feel like this might be really accentuated with the sextile to Pluto. It's not a square; it's just a sextile. could
Just a
be
sextile.
could be
Famous
more
last words.
extreme.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Um, it could be more extreme than this will be, but still, it's an influence. And this is like the very end of the decan, so it's also in like the bound of Saturn. I don't usually get this deep into essential dignity, but looking into the weeds of all this stuff, it just feels like a very kind of intense uh, moment for Mars in a way, even though you might not think of Mars and Pisces as being so intense. Um, there's just and then the Mercury piece feels like just giving it the megaphone, you know.
Yeah, I get that.
Whatever story is emerging with regard to this sort of, martial sacrifice for a Piscean ideal, is going to have the mouthpiece of Mercury, albeit a Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, and in Taurus too. So I mean, the mouthpiece can be very internalized in my mind.
Right.
Like the internal dialogue could be rather, I don't want to say loud, but persistent. When we think about Taurus, like if there was a, you're like, name a persistent sign. I'm like, that's Taurus. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't really give up. But I really like that you pointed out that Mars being in at the very end of Pisces and being in its own decan there. And that's the special thing about these back-to-back decans of Pisces and Aries is that Mars has two in a row.
Right.
So there's something to be said about Mars just moving from this place of Pisces and into Aries, to meet Jupiter. That is coming.
Mhm.
And it being in its own decan on both sides and moving
Right.
into its dignity. So it's interesting when you think about sacrificing for a big dream or a big ideal or a big vision. And we think about Aries energy that's coming as being the sign that like it lights you on fire to go for it, or to walk off that cliff, hoping that
Right.
something, having that instinct that something's going to catch you, or at least, the inspiration will keep you going. And that's always a risk, and there could be just, it's like a precursor to taking a risk, or like feeling that you have, like you're being drawn to something, or Pisces is very soulful in that sense, where there's like spiritual inclinations that come up. So that could be part of it. Of course, we have a lot of like hot button issues that are going on in the world right now, and with power, and the Roe versus Wade issue. And so I think a lot of that stuff can come up here too, because what's happening simultaneously is Venus and Aries is getting close to squaring Pluto
Yeah.
herself. And so I feel like this week is going to be big for that issue.
Well,
Just
also the eclipse. I mean, we're
don't
still,
forget that
it's
eclipse.
still going to be, the lunar eclipse is still going to be pretty fresh. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's very hard to ignore the lunar eclipse when we're thinking about that stuff, especially
Yeah.
with the sun on Algol. Uh,
Yes.
Primordial feminine rage is evoked.
Bring it.
Um,
Bring that rage off with their heads,
off with
says
their
the
head.
Queen of Hearts.
And the last thing I'll say about the Mars thing is like I think that's a great point about two decans in a row. And I feel like, it's Mars is coming off that conjunction to Neptune. So there's like some of what I was saying about the sacrifice and the ideal and all that stuff is going to be
Mhm.
colored by Neptune, which is both going to make it, bigger and grander and more idealistic, but also, there's the fog element. Um, like, my teacher, who's Austin Coppock, has pointed out the fog of war as a signature for Mars Neptune. And I mean, in this current moment, that's a particularly resonant phrase, which I imagine could very easily take on very literal qualities.
Yeah,
So, now
absolutely.
Mars is emerging from the fog of war and heading into, as you pulled up with this chart, straight into Aries.
Straight into Aries. So Mars moves into Aries on May 24th. And it's interesting because the moon crosses over it, but it actually crosses over it at 29 degrees of Pisces. So it's like the moon, it like lights Mars up, in its final like throes of Pisces, and then they both move into Aries together. So I feel like that day just in general is going to be very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
like energy wise, because whenever Mars moves into a new sign, like I mean Mars is what propels us and drives us and gives us motivation, and so when it crosses over a threshold of signs, it's always kind of recalibrating itself in a sense. But to have the moon kind of cross with it and like conjunct it right before it crosses, which will be about midday here on the Pacific Coast, a little closer to dinner time. Well, depending on when you eat dinner on the East Coast. But yeah, it's just it, it's a fascinating initiation
Mm-hmm.
for a planet getting into its domicile and on the Aries world point, about to join Jupiter. And so let me pick your brain just about Mars and Aries in general. Like what are we in for, Jared?
Well, yeah, I think you're right to point out. I mean, it's hard to avoid the moon kind of escorting Mars across that threshold.
Come with me.
Come with me, let's go start some shit.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very loud, and I can't help but notice this is also a Tuesday, aka Mars Day.
It is.
This is happening. It's just like the number of things drawing the eye and the attention to Mars is pretty astounding. And this is like really one of the most powerful positions that Mars has in the zodiac. I mean, right at the beginning of Aries in its own decan. Also, interesting that it is going to be in the bounds of Jupiter. Um, and
Yeah.
Jupiter is right there.
Is right there. Jupiter just got so much larger. Like Jupiter
Right.
just like literally had a propane tank like hooked up to it.
Yeah.
No.
So I feel like, there's multiple things. There's, on a personal level, like wherever you have Aries in your chart, like there's gonna be a pretty this is going to be a pretty loud announcement of, pulling your attention to that part of your life, whatever house that is, whatever planets you may or may not have there, are going to be activated. And with that, there's just like energy and drive directed to that area of life, right?
Yeah.
You so, but then there's, I think, with Aries, I think about autonomy. you know
Mm.
there's a strong desire to follow your own path, and so it might be that part of your chart is put, you're feeling a strong drive to be autonomous in that area, and it might be something that we're just seeing play out in the news. It's like, that kind of very fierce independent streak. um,
Yes.
it's like one of many things that's happening in this month that I can't help but look at, think about things that are going on in the news, certainly with like abortion rights, but then also, there's a war going on, a big one, and we're going to have this very, very loud and powerful Mars ingress.
Yeah.
And I think both those issues are gonna be really activated at this time.
Absolutely. It is it's explosive.
Yeah.
Um it's explosive literally figuratively, like it just has that energy to it. And what Matt Greer and I were talking about in the last episode with Jupiter and Aries, thinking about like the highly masculine energy that can come out with, I mean, Jupiter and Aries, but having Mars there too. And now Venus is under, I mean, if you're looking at this chart with us, we have basically Mars, the moon when it escorts it over, Jupiter, Chiron, and Venus all together in this Aries cluster. And so it is a lot about autonomy. It is a lot about the self. It is, we see that. We see women out on the streets holding signs saying it's like, hands off my body. This is my body. Like, this is my vessel. Like,
Yeah.
like, and having to fight for that, it's like, it has that masculine energy, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily a man. It means
Right.
that it's just, there is an outward motivation of defense that is happening. And so I think just defense in general is a big term that is going to be in the in the ethers at this time, where people are going to be defending things.
And then simultaneously, because astrology, the chart doesn't just happen to one group of people, right?
That's
It's
right.
like we're all under the same sky. So simultaneously, the opponents, whichever group you're thinking about, where there's some kind of battle being waged, that group and their opponents are operating under the same skies, and some of the same characteristics and signatures are going to be on display. So it's like, as much as there is defense happening, there's going to be offense. Like the opponents of one group are going to be making moves to conquer more territory.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's just going to be particularly fierce in this moment.
Great word for, if there, that's another key word, is fierce in this. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's the end of the day. That's like when we think about Mars, we think about warring factions, and there is defense, there's offense, and those tables turn.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's depends on who has the upper hand, um or what we perceive that to be in the first place. But it does have this sides type of energy to it. And here we have, just socially speaking, we have Venus Well, we have Mercury there in its trine to Pluto with Mercury
Hmm.
retrograde around the same time on the 24th. So, I feel like we're going to have, there's going to be, speaking of like some very big issues, taboo issues, things
Hmm.
that are controversial to talk about, or we're trying to keep swept under the rug, or secrets could come out about, like, I feel like that wasn't quite, like a lot of us
Yeah.
started through secrets coming out, but there could be more that is unraveled around that
Yeah.
time with Mercury Pluto. But I feel like the whole Venus component, especially with Venus being in such a difficult place with the Aries ingress, like she's really showing her rock in a hard place besiegement between
Mhm.
Mars and Saturn back on the beginning of Aries season now. And so here she is meeting that square with Pluto on Thursday, um, on May 26th. And of course, look at the moon just hanging
Mm.
out with her on
The
Thursday.
moon's really doing the
Moon is
most
stirring it up.
during this time. Yeah, the moon keeps showing up right where it's needed to trigger things
Yeah,
immediately.
it really is.
A lot of times, there'll be an ingress or an aspect, and you're just kind of there, and then the moon comes and joins, and you're like,
You're like, oh, I know, I feel it, but
yes, it's like
but
pulled into the sublunar realm of embodiment. But yeah, there's a bunch of these trigger points that happen immediately
yeah,
um,
right
during this
away.
time period. And I can't help but notice that Venus is going to sextile Saturn
Yes,
and then square Pluto. So there
yeah.
is a
So
sort of, I mean, maybe not traditionally, because Pluto's not a traditional planet, but there is a sort of besiegement at play there.
yeah, she's going through, and that this is her opening sextile to Saturn too. So,
Mm,
this is developing that story of where she was besieged before to begin
sure,
with.
yeah.
And then adding a Pluto component to it. And so once again, with May 24th through the 26th, like midweek, Venus is going through some things. And I mean, if we pull it back to just interpersonal relationships, it's an interesting placement only because we think about Venus and Saturn being more friendly. They, when we think about relationships, we would like some stability there or some long term. Well, most of not most of us, some of us would, but they seem to work hand in hand with one another. But just thinking about their initial conjunction, it's a little hairy to
Yeah.
begin with. So then that's always kind of seeding the whole cycle itself. But it's almost like it almost like has this stability component, or trying to find some sort of grounding or plan or something. But then there's this really big Pluto piece that's like, you
Yeah.
can't ignore this. There's still these tensions, there's still irritation. And so I feel like relationships, social friendships, your one-on-one partnerships, etc. It's gonna be a little rocky.
And
But
there's
it's
some
almost like a rocky to get somewhere. I don't know.
yeah, probably some uncovering. It's like if it was just the Venus sextile Saturn, I think that would be a little more. It would be on its own. That would be pretty workable. It's like Venus, Venus and Saturn together is a commitment signature, but
Yeah.
then Venus and Aries is a very impulsive energy, right? So there's the restraint of Saturn and the impulse to sort of do what feels good of Venus and Aries. Um, you know, do what feels good. What's the phrase? Whatever. Basically, no fucks given. Um, but but in this case, it's a fire sign and an air sign. So there's a lot of sort of like activation of ideas, and it's like the Venus Saturn is like, maybe it's a good time to organize your protests, right? Um, but with the square to Pluto, there's going to be some radical people showing up to your protest who might
I
undercut
love
your
that
message.
example. That's great. That's great. I think you're definitely onto something there.
Or
Um,
they
eh,
will undercut your message, or they will push you to be radicalized. Who knows?
yeah, it's or you're organizing with the best of intentions, you got it all out there, and then when you're out on the streets, it's like things get like chaotic. It's like
Yeah.
the darker side comes out, and it's like even though you're like had this plan and we're going to state these things and we're going to have this, higher ideals in mind, it's just like instinct takes over.
Hmm.
And and you're human and you're angry.
Right.
And like that, just that can happen.
Yeah.
So, another thing that was happening during all of this is the sun making a sextile to Jupiter. So the sun is also lighting up this Jupiter space.
Hmm.
Uh, Basically on the 23rd on Monday. So it's interesting. It's almost like the sun Jupiter kind of kicks things off. I probably should have started there. But it's the sun and Jupiter kick things off with the sextile, but at the same time Mercury retrograde sextiles Mars basically on like
Hmm.
Monday, Tuesday, and then the moon lights that up. So I mean just the sun and the sun and Jupiter together. I mean, this is another kind of expansive preparatory position of like ideas and I feel like the justice, like the Venus wanting fighting for justice and the beliefs of Jupiter and like just it's a noisy week. I feel like there's a lot of noise going on in the name of progress, I guess.
Yeah, I think the Sun Jupiter piece is just very energizing in general,
Absolutely.
stimulating.
Especially in these signs. Like
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
I don't know about you. Jupiter moved into Aries and like I just had like more energy, even though Mars is still in Pisces. There's just some sort of shift that
Yeah.
subtle, but there.
Yeah. I think it's going to be less subtle pretty
I
soon.
think you're
I think
absolutely
around
right.
this week we're looking at. I mean, so many things happen just in that first, the opening 5 days or so.
I know. Like, enjoy
Um,
the subtlety now. It's not going to be so subtle. And so, speaking of not so subtle, this is basically, well, okay. So, there's two ways we can go with this. As we said, big week here. We have two things happening. Obviously, one of the big things is Mars just inching ever closer to Jupiter, which is going to happen like in the last of the balsamic moon on May 29th will be
mhm.
when that's on Sunday, May 29th, when they perfect. But also Venus, after she does her little dance that we were talking about with Saturn and Pluto here, she moves into her domicile in Taurus on Saturday, the 28th. So I guess let's talk about Venus and Taurus a little bit
Yeah.
since we were just kind of getting her. But there's a different Venus.
Yeah, so I had this, I was thinking about this earlier and I had this kind of silly thought, which is, Venus is coming to her home sign, um, which is nice and would usually have a certain kind of connotation. But it's almost like Venus comes home after the eclipses to discover that her kid has been through like a wild party while she was out, and everything is in disarray. And it's like she thought she was coming home from whatever she was doing, in Aries, which was probably a little draining and crazy. She's probably like, okay, I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna like watch TV and sit on the couch and relax. But it's like, nope. She walks in the door. And she's like, shit, I have to spend the next 3 days just cleaning up the house. Now 3 days is not a real timeline. That's just extrapolating my ridiculous metaphor. But I think it's gonna be. I think that we've had Venus and Taurus with Uranus. I don't remember if we've had Venus and Taurus with the North Node yet in this
No,
time. I
nope,
don't think we have,
nope.
and and certainly not after an eclipse. So this is going to be the most kind of disrupted expression of Venus in its home sign of Taurus that we've seen in this time period. Um, and I just feel like there's a lot of kind of cleaning up to do. Um, that said, it's still, you know, I think it's gonna feel good to have Venus and Taurus after, especially after that Pluto square in Aries, um, just on a personal level. Um,
Yeah. It
that's
it
what I'm
it,
starting.
it calms her down.
Yeah.
Calms her down a little bit, which like can be good just for like social energy. But maybe she's calming down with like getting down to earth, having to like organize or like get into like
Hmm.
Taurus space where there is a once again that persistence, that dedication, that commitment there. She's in her bounds first off, so she's like, okay, well, I'm in a better spot, I'm on my own terms, I'm like, but like you said, like what has happened to me, where have I been? My house looks a little bit different than the last year I was here. It's just it's different, navigating a different territory. And what does Venus do? She likes to harmonize, she likes to bring peace to a situation, she wants to coordinate, she wants to cooperate, hopefully. And so I like the metaphor of like kind of cleaning things up or finding the balance once again, or like once that, because that area of your chart, with Taurus, there was a shakeup that has been happening there with the eclipses. Now, granted,
Hmm.
the first one, the solar eclipse was pretty, like it had
Benevolent.
some really nice things going to it. So there could be some beneficial starts that are taking place in that Taurus house, but it doesn't mean that things are status quo or the same, just because, it's like those eclipses, it's like gave us something really nice, I think, but it also gave a lot that went with it. And so how do we rebalance that? How do we clean it up?
Yeah.
What does harmony look like now? Venus has a job to do.
Yeah. The way I see it, it's kind of like, what this time period between the eclipses and, the Uranus Saturn square, the way that the eclipses are activating Uranus, um, and then just observing what has happened now that we've been through one of the eclipses. It's like things that we consider stable and set and fixed have really been disrupted and overturned. And now we have a few more real life examples to point to. I mean, I think, there's the supply chain
Yes.
issues
Yes.
continue and continue.
Mm-hmm.
The whole situation with looming food shortages is like a slow motion car crash that we are watching. Nothing is preventing that. That's still going on. I was seeing stuff about like baby formula. There's a
Oh, I
shortage
just
of
saw
that.
that. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of little things that, and it's going to be less little the more of them there are. Um, and then, of
Oh, yeah.
course, the Supreme Court decision, which,
Yeah.
is certain, at this point is only reported, hasn't actually officially happened yet, but, effectively has happened. Things that we consider stable and have considered stable for an extremely long period of time are really not stable right now. And so that's kind of what I see when it comes to, that's not going to be, everything's not going to be quite so intense on a personal level for most people, right? Like for me, I think this is going to be nice and fine because it's basically like there's gonna be all this activity in my ninth house. I'm gonna go to an astrology conference. I'm gonna, meet a bunch of people, have a bunch of new friends, and then Venus will move into my ninth house. Maybe I'll just continue to have more good times talking to those new friends, right? um, so I think it's gonna feel different depending on what the sort of scale is that we're looking at.
True. And I feel like we're talking about Venus here too. So it can bring, it can bring awareness to this. It might have like all those issues that you're talking about. It could have like new levels of stasis where it was
Right.
disruptive before, but now we're like, oh, we kind of got a handle on it, and we can, but we can only have that handle for so long. Because I mean, if we're looking into the future, we're looking into Mars eventually getting into Taurus, activating
Right.
Uranus, the North Node, all at the end of July, early August. So it's almost like maybe Venus helps to like stabilize those
Right.
problems for a little bit, and like bridge connections and build, like bring it together. But she can only do her job there for so long before
Exactly.
it kind of
That's what I was going to say.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like Venus comes around and okay, everything has been destabilized. I'm gonna try to stabilize,
I'm gonna do
right?
my best.
I'm gonna do my best for the time that I'm here. In the meantime, at some point that's gonna include running into Uranus,
Oh, and she
and
won't get
crossing
there.
crossing the North Node. Um, but that'll be an interesting thing to witness because I don't want to. I don't want to say it as if Venus will have no power, or Venus will have power in that dynamic, but just a big job to do.
Yeah. That is true. A big unstable job to big disruptive job to handle. But so basically having Venus move into Taurus, she's in a better place now, so we'll let her hang out there while she had, enjoy it how you can.
Hmm.
We might need her there for a little bit. But this really brings us to the day before the new moon in Gemini, here on Sunday, the 29th of May, when we have Mars and Jupiter meet. And so, a potent combination. Let's just say, obviously, we've already
Yes.
illustrated the fact that Mars is in its own sign, it's in its own decan. Jupiter is in its own bounds. Jupiter now has its ruler on top of it. Both planets are incredibly strong, and at the same time, we're leading to this new moon in Gemini that has this signature, when the new moon's on Monday, May 30th, which is that Memorial? That's Memorial Day, I think, here. And
Oh yeah.
is it? Um,
Yeah. I think so.
I think I like do it. I probably should pull up a calendar yes, it is. That is correct. Monday, May 30th is Memorial Day. Um, but something to think about too as we lead up on Sunday to the new moon taking place, because I think it takes place at the dawn of midnight or something. It's really, or no, not that early, but it's
Mhm.
early morning on Monday. But point being, here we have this balsamic Gemini moon making a sextile to this Mars Jupiter conjunction. And we always know, the balsamic moon, it is dark. There is seeds being laid. There is, we're in contemplative mode, kind of, as much as you can be with all the Gemini Aries going on. But any thoughts on, these two together, but also the fact that they see during the darkest hour of a moon cycle too?
Yeah, I think my thinking about it. I mean, I'm trying to contain myself from going because I find myself wanting to talk about the world a lot. Uh,
It's important.
it's quite a world right now, isn't it?
It is. Talk
Um,
about it.
yeah, I mean, the way I see it, kind of building off what we were just talking about, the instability of the eclipses, Uranus. Uranus has gotten a leg up in this battle with Saturn recently. Um,
Yes.
Partially because Saturn is also just has more distance, right? So
Yeah.
they're not as Saturn is not constraining Uranus as much at the moment. And so with all this instability, there's just a lot of stuff has been shaken. And I think like in the aftermath of that, there's in this very, very dark moon moment, there's sort of I think there is this piece of like of laying the seeds of the Mars Jupiter conjunction or whatever that represents, which is going to be something personally, but then on a collective level, you put those planets together. It's really like I see it as sort of it's like coalescing a a philosophy or or a mental or spiritual framework for you know for waging war.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I feel you.
um, and so I think that you know when I think about especially putting it in that frame of like you know planting the seeds, right? I feel like there's probably going to be events that coincide with the Mars Jupiter conjunction
Oh yeah.
that are big and loud. But I think almost more importantly is what you're talking about laying the seeds of almost like an ideological birth
And
that's happening,
Gemini
which I believe
is
will, yeah,
is the
exactly.
perfect carrier of that.
Yeah, which I think is gonna play out over a longer period of time. Like that. There's gonna be ripples in terms of like the 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 coalescing of ideas. Sorry, I just sort of lost my
No,
train of thought mid sentence.
that's all right. It's a That happens when you talk so long about
Yeah.
planets. Um,
Jupiter, but Jupiter unifies and Mars attacks. Mars has a battle to wage. So that's what I see.
and I totally agree with you there. And it makes me think about just like, waging the war of individual beliefs, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like it's almost like, people are organizing based on their positions and stances of like the individual belief system, too. And of course we're gonna have strong figureheads come out, like,
Yeah.
having Mars and Jupiter conjunct, like I was talking about this in the last podcast about just crossing over the Aries point and Jupiter and Aries. There's always big power changes, big power shifts, plays for power, people coming into power, people being killed for power.
Yeah.
Like there's this happens basically. But as you pointed out, we're talking about a conjunction that is setting up a longer cycle here, of course. And, it takes Mars a couple years to get around the zodiac. So this is a um, very strong Martian signature for Mars to carry on in relation to Mars and Jupiter topics, um, for a good amount of time. And having it seed right before a Gemini new moon is an excellent sounding board for whatever that
Mm.
mission is, right? Because it's not even just a Gemini new moon. That Gemini new moon is, it's close enough. It's basically the last aspect that the moon makes is that sextile to Mars and Jupiter before it seeds. So I feel like you said, kind of the doling out of the mission, or the way it just keeps coming. It's just going to keep coming within this lunar cycle, but there's obviously a much larger mission that's going to take a much longer period to then activate.
Mhm.
But it's big. It's
Yeah.
big, and we're talking about Aries. We're talking about new beginnings. We're talking about initiatives, uh, and big enthusiasm, confidence. We're going to see that in the world, but we're going to see it in our own lives too. We are going to have some sort of it feels big, motivating and big inspiration
Yeah.
to some extent too, because we still gotta live our own lives within this chaotic world that doesn't end. We can
Yeah.
so
Um, one thing I noticed is that this new moon, which I guess you're moving to now.
I am moving to this new moon May
Yeah.
30th, 4:30 a.m. Pacific.
The very early 9 degrees. Um, it's very close to the degree. I mean, it's pretty much the same degree that Mars will station direct
Yes,
after the retrograde in Gemini.
yes,
So Mars stations direct at 8 degrees in January next year. That really draws my attention, especially because Mars is making an aspect to the new moon even in this
yeah,
chart. Mars, it's like that. I think that whatever we're describing about the birth that happens with the Mars Jupiter conjunction is going to have a pivot point, you know, on that Mars station in January. So,
yeah.
come
Like,
come talk to us in,
come talk to us back then. We'll see.
in
We'll
seven
know
months,
much
whenever
more
that.
about this Mars business. It obviously catches my eye because my Mars is 9 degrees Gemini, and I'm
Oh,
just like,
right.
oh, like, huh. I'm like, see this new moon, and then I'm thinking about the Mars cycle and the retrograde and it coming back there. Oh
Well,
my God.
hopefully it will be empowering
And let
for
us
you.
hope. Let us hope.
And I also can't help but notice that this is less this is less nice. It's also the where the U.S. Sibley chart has Uranus,
Yes, yeah, it's true. And it's
eight
the
degrees of
descendant
Gemini,
of
and yeah.
the yes. So there
So
is
I
we're
feel like
back to the warring.
yeah, it's it's common sense to say there's big stuff going on in the States right now.
Yeah.
But I think particularly this sort of uh, I don't know. I mean, our seventh house in that Sibley chart is pretty wild.
With
If
Mars
you,
there too. And I
yeah,
think it stations on that Mars, doesn't it? It's pretty close. So
yeah.
whew.
I think there's the degree to which we are fighting each other is going to really kick up a notch here. But I think you
Yeah.
don't have to be an astrologer to know that.
Yeah, you don't, but the stars are helping to confirm. So if you're
They
you're
certainly
wondering,
are.
and like thinking about like we're really diving into this Mars Jupiter conjunction signature, obviously, in the luminaries playing into it, and that is absolutely a big piece, huge piece. Um, but it's interesting to think about the luminaries being ruled by that Mercury retrograde that is getting ever closer to that lunar eclipse degree. And it's also in that formation that we were talking about earlier, where it, trines Pluto, it squares Saturn, and it sextiles
Right.
Neptune. So yeah, so we bring all these outers and these bigger, collective energies to play within it too, because of those planets being there. But Mercury in a square to Saturn, I think that's the closest. No, it's about the same, because literally Saturn and Neptune are both at 25 degrees and 13 minutes of a sign.
Oh
Like
my
they're
God.
like it's down to like the minute how close
Wow.
those two are
But Mercury
together.
doesn't quite get there, right? Mercury, it
Because
doesn't
it
quite get to
stations.
25. It stations at 26, I believe.
Let me bring old Mercury up here.
Which, I'm kind of glad.
I'm glad it doesn't. It
I
hints
mean,
at that.
it's like, would you rather have it be exactly square as Saturn or conjunct Algol? It's-
Pick your
pick,
poison.
pick your poison.
Yeah. So,
Um,
but there's still tension there, right?
oh
And
yeah,
maybe and then maybe part of that is like unresolved too, because it doesn't
because it
make
doesn't.
it there.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
I will say that Mercury is. I feel like it's kind of the opposite of what we were saying earlier about Mercury retrograde currently, or while it's in Gemini, is like, it still feels fast, right?
Yeah.
Despite the fact that Mercury is literally moving slowly, um, and Mercury is retrograde. When it's at this point, it's stationing. It's square Saturn. It's in Taurus, which is not a fast sign at all. Mercury
Nope.
is really everything about this is saying slow, except for maybe the
Slow
North Node,
down. Yeah,
you
the
know,
North Node.
and then slow and weird, right? Like, it's like
With the Neptune influence there
yeah, with the
too.
Neptune and Pluto, it's
Uh
like slow, weird, and deep.
and the moon is sextiling Mercury too from Cancer when it goes direct on Friday, June 3rd.
Yeah.
Granted, we'll probably be asleep, most of us here in the States. If you're overseas, not so much, but
So
so
the
that's
weird
it's
is
yeah.
accentuated,
The
the
weird's
Pluto and Neptune.
accentuated, right? Because we got the moon trining Neptune too. It's opposing. So the moon's lighting up that Neptune Pluto piece as well on Friday, the 3rd. Um, and what's interesting about this whole period too is after the new moon, between the new moon and the first quarter in Virgo that happens Tuesday, June 7th, there's really not, I mean, there's really not a lot going on in the skies. I mean, there is, we've kind of illustrated that there is a lot going on in the skies, but as far as like the movements that we just all like we dissected of before the new moon, all that's really going on after the new moon is Mercury stationing direct on the 3rd on Friday, and then Saturn, and we know that these two are kind of working together right now.
Yeah.
Saturn just happens to be stationing retrograde the following day on June 4th. So we
Mhm.
have even though there's not much going on, there is these heavy,
Yeah.
this heavy configuration that is stationing in opposite directions. So, I mean, any thoughts on those like working as a pair?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because especially because they're not going
Not
exact
meeting. Yeah.
in their square, they're not really meeting. They're turning around just
They're like, I didn't see you. I feel
yeah.
you there, but I'm not interacting with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help thinking about the last time Mercury stationed direct square Saturn was the election, the
Oh,
US presidential election, I believe.
2016 or
2020.
2020? I just go back to the 2016.
Thinking about
It's all
thinking
2016.
about as an example of things going slow. Um,
Mm.
you know, on one hand, you're like, oh, great, Mercury is direct. On the other hand, Mercury is stationed and it's square Saturn. So, as an example of things going slow, if you think about the ballot counting process
Mm.
in November, it took like how long? Like 3 weeks. So many delays, so many issues. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to happen because, that's not the same moment, but at the same time, yeah, it's like both these planets are kind of planting a flag and saying, like, look here, this is important. This space is important. So Saturn is doing the same, um, and which is great because this is just before squaring my natal Saturn, so I get a little bit of a reprieve.
Ah.
Before it says I'm going to turn around, and I say, okay, go right
You're
ahead.
like, go. Yeah. Oh, but you feel it.
Yeah.
You
I
sense
think the
it.
other thing I would just say, just to kind of like contextualize, like like a Saturn station, Saturn has been carving out this territory in Aquarius,
Yeah.
right? And so now it's going to turn around and go back and review. So let's, if we go with the sort of easiest metaphor of Saturn is building structures, or building new systems in Aquarius, probably new mental frameworks, etc., new
Hmm.
bureaucracies, whatever it is.
Yes.
um, some of that stuff, it's sort of like, all right, we have to go actually make sure that the structure is sound, you know? So Saturn has been in its sort of most diurnal mode for a while, and now it's going back in the other direction. Um, so,
Yeah, and
yeah,
it covered a lot of territory
it
during
sure did.
its direct. I mean, it's been moving direct since October 10th of 2021. And we know, I mean, just pull it back. Think about all that's happened in that time. And so from June 4th, when it goes retrograde until October 22nd, which just happens to be, I don't know, couple days before an eclipse coming in. It's the solar eclipse in Scorpio. I have a feeling that when Saturn emerges once again, it'll be very potent.
Yeah.
And so we do have this handful of months where Saturn is, like you said, it's kind of, I wouldn't say going back to the drawing board, but I mean, there's a lot that's happened that needs to be sorted out and
Hmm.
strategized and like really, you know, take time taken with. Um, and I mean, so if you have Saturn, if you have any planets basically at about 25 degrees, give or take, of fixed signs, Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, or Scorpio, you're going to be, you're probably going to be feeling this turnaround here. And
And you've already been feeling it because the lunar eclipse was at 25.
exactly. So
Oh,
Saturn's
Scorpio.
like, we're not done here. And it's going to retrograde back to the 18 degrees of Aquarius. So really, if you got some planets between 18 and 25, give or take, there's Saturn ain't done with you yet. But the first pass has commenced, and now it's time to get back into the review of that. But I feel like Saturn retrograde is a great time to like restructure things, and we think about like Aquarius just being that a very visionary place, different visions than Pisces. These are more utopian or ideal and like concept and future,
Hmm.
projection in my mind, or like the future blueprint that we're working with. And there's all these different like you know systems and world and a world framework that has definitely changed that we have to now incorporate. Like, for example, like I thought I was going to buy a house this year, but I look at house prices and hello, they are like, I can't.
Yeah.
It's and Saturn is basically dancing over my IC in
Hmm.
Aquarius. So now there's delays there. So the plan there. So how do we go back with this and reformulate the plan, because the plan, it can't be manifested in the same way that it once was, because now, the world is working differently.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a
The other thing
personal
that I
example.
Yeah, the other thing that crosses my mind is, everything we were saying earlier about this destabilization of Uranus and the eclipses. This is going to bring Saturn back into that square with Uranus in a much greater intensity. This turning point
Yeah.
is when Saturn. It's almost like Saturn was like, do do do. All right. I had that fist fight with Uranus. I think I probably won. I'm gonna get going. And then it's like, oh wait, what's going on back there?
Right, you
What's
got a
going on
lot
back there? And like,
stronger. What?
yeah, in like the middle of fixed signs, things are looking crazy. I think they may need me. I think maybe I left too soon.
Mm,
Obviously,
that's
this is
funny.
not the actual thought process of the planet Saturn, but I think that some of the lumbering structures of society are kind of going to be enacting that. It's sort of like, oh, I thought we were moving, we're not. Okay, we got to go back and deal with that stuff that I left behind. You know,
Yeah,
especially on a really macro scale. Um,
absolutely. I
so
think
maybe Saturn in this retrograde phase will go and try to contain some of that disruption.
we need some. It's almost like, did I say we need some Saturn? We need some Saturn. Saturn, can you?
Like we don't need more square.
We
Like
yeah.
I don't want more Saturn Uranus square in my life, but I know
But
there's some aspects of our world that need Saturn
that
more than
need it. But
Uranus.
to speak to what we were talking about earlier, and like almost, we talked about things not quite making it, an unfinished business. It's like
Yeah.
one thing to not make it and know that it's going to come back around, but with Saturn, Uranus, the Uranus square, it's not going to come back around. It
Yeah.
is, it's very present, but it's not going to perfect there. So it's almost like cleaning it up to
Yeah.
me, like, and Saturn's coming back to kind of clean it up a little bit because Uranus has run rampant. And we still need Saturn's influence there, for these bigger overarching tension that has been happening, 2020, 2021, 2022. I mean, the years are taking us into even more stuff, of course. Astrology never stops, but especially at the beginning of this decade, I'm like,
Oh
who
yeah.
who lined this up? So I think we need, yeah, Saturn to clean some things up here a little bit. But only because there has been so much tension and the balance has gotten off a
Yeah.
bit. So keep in mind, to summarize that week period, Monday the 30th through basically Tuesday, June 7th, when we have our first quarter in Virgo. Talk about cleaning it up. I feel like a first quarter in Virgo feels very like, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
There is just a lot of shifting. We get this whole lunar cycle started off with stations, basically a station direct by Mercury and a station retrograde by Saturn. So there are like this stillness in the sky, but at the same time, this kind of, it's a different type of shift taking place, and it's kicking everything off. So let us move. So okay, we definitely have Gemini and Virgo planets here today. So we're gonna try to go a little
Pick up the
faster
pace.
through some of this stuff. All right, so Virgo first quarter on the Tuesday the 7th. I feel like, okay, so Virgo first quarter, then Mercury is going to make, Mercury's all slow here. We've been talking about Mercury being slow, and it's going to make a trine, its last trine to Pluto here in Capricorn. So we got Earth trine going. We got a first quarter uh, moon in an Earth sign kicking things off. We also have Venus and Uranus getting closer and closer to conjunction, but also in an Earth sign. And then eventually we'll have Mercury move back into Gemini. So, I mean, this week to me feels productive. We got so much Earth taking place, with Mercury, Pluto, Virgo, first quarter. um,
It looks to me like a return to a more recognizable reality after a
mm,
lot of very surreal experiences in between eclipse, especially coming out of eclipse time. now we're getting into the next lunar phase. The moon is visible. There's a little more kind of energy and a little more agency restored to our lives as we go about our business. you know?
It's almost like getting a handle on something again.
Yeah.
Like it's especially Mercury Pluto final round. Mercury's starting to pick up space, not too much. It's really
Yeah.
just sitting there. But
Yeah, Mercury, and then Mercury moving into the trine with Pluto, I feel like it's the third one. I guess, I imagine there's going to be some kind of, you know, investigative journalism that's going to come through that's going to, be kind of noteworthy.
yeah,
Maybe something that has
definitely.
been in the works throughout this retrograde period.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's and a lot, and that can shift things, shifting those perspectives, getting Mercury geared up to get back into Gemini.
Hmm.
Because that's kind of what's happening here. First quarter in Virgo backed by Mercury trining Pluto is interesting too. And like kind of like the idea of like getting a handle on something, getting back to business, dealing with changes and what's shifted and having to move real world pieces around. When I think about Virgo, it's like I have to like literally do something in the here and now on planet Earth. Like
Right.
I am moving. I have no choice but having to clean that closet out and get in there and do that. Or like, oh, I've been ignoring this paperwork for so long and now it's big and it need in order to for the job to get done or the job to carry through, I have to handle all these nitty gritty details. And so it feels very like embodied, down earth, like earth still needs you. You got things to do. Let's do
Right.
it. While Venus at the same time is like, hi, I'm hanging out with Uranus. So the week seems pretty productive, I think, in that sense. But by the time we get to the weekend, so basically Friday, um, especially Saturday, because here that moon,
The
that
moon. This is what I'm
moon
saying.
is
This Gemini
he
season, the
is
moon is,
stirring things up.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
so
moon is
basically
always there.
it's always there. So you turn around and the moon's just glaring at you, and you're like, "What? Where'd you come from?" So here we have this on Saturday, June 11th. We have Venus conjuncting Uranus with that good old Scorpio moon making an opposition to that place. Meanwhile, we're getting closer and closer to a full moon in Sagittarius. So we got a lot of lunar energy behind this Venus Uranus conjunction, and and
Yeah.
especially Scorpio moon backed by Mars, who's reaching almost the middle of Aries there, getting close to Chiron if you practice Chiron. So there's some edginess there. There's some
Yeah.
edginess around the relationship planets in their own signs, but in
Hmm.
aversion too.
I'm just looking at this thinking like, wow, what a chart for a person this would be.
To
It's
people,
gonna
I
be
know,
it's
I
gonna be
know.
somebody's chart.
Oh, it'll be someone's. It'll be a few people's.
This baby is gonna have quite a life. Um, yeah, I mean, I see this. I think, various things. I mean, I think everything we talked about with the Venus ingress into Taurus is going to come to life in a profound way here with Venus meeting Uranus.
Mhm.
Um, whatever the story is in that house for you, this is the ruler of this house coming into contact with this very liberatory energy that's that's all about overthrowing outdated structures. Um, so this tension of stabilize and destabilize is really activated here, and the moon is present to be like to really make it clear and make it come through, albeit in an opposition. And so, I think, I mean, and I think in the world, I think these women's rights issues, just it's hard not to think about it.
Oh
Looking at this
yeah,
chart,
it's
it's just
it's
like
can.
it's right there, and I think especially because the Taurus Scorpio axis um,
Mhm.
feels really activated, especially around like bodily rights,
Yeah. Well,
bodily
and
autonomy
reproductive
and
rights
reproductive
because
rights,
yeah.
exactly. Um, so I'm sure there's going to be some major action maybe,
Yeah.
and maybe this will be, I mean, I'm just like, it just looks like the chart of
It
massive
feels like
protest.
a good protest day, or
Yeah, it
it feels
does. It
like
really does.
hit the streets, or we're having a fundraiser. These are money signs too. We're having a fundraiser to
Yeah.
raise money for the freedom of women and their autonomy over their bodies, and their reproductive organs, and like this.
But
That feels
also
right.
that Scorpio moon to me feels like a time of like processing the emotional like dimensions of this.
Weight of it
And
all.
yeah,
Yeah.
and with the south node there, like a sort of shedding.
Mm.
There's like shedding and there's like a bit of like a grief energy and an anger, with the Mars and Aries.
Yeah. And maybe like, and just having the moon in aversion to the ruler Mars too. It's like you can almost be like blindsided by, the rage that's actually there.
Right.
And it can come up in ways that emotionally maybe you're not prepared for, or it just kind of can take you by surprise in a sense. And immediately when I saw this connection too, I'm thinking, well, this is the first time we've actually revisited this, lunar position since the lunar
Yeah.
eclipse too. So it's like it could be activating um that energy again. Also, like you said, the south node energy, which does tend to give us a moment of release, or something that's draining us that has to be like processed and gone through and let go of, or released in some way. So it's a very potent weekend. It's definitely a different weekend than the one before. I am looking at it because, just full disclosure, this is my Uranus opposition. It's
Wow.
pretty much exactly.
Wow.
So I'm like, I know that I'm going to be in for something. Like, let's just say that. Um, but
Do your listeners know your chart relatively
I
well?
yeah, I tend to talk about it a
Okay.
lot.
So then also like first, seventh,
Yeah, because I
right?
have Uranus on my ascendant, exactly. So I'm like, I'm looking for I'm looking am I looking forward to it? Um I'm learning more and more about Uranus because I'm a Uranian person to begin with. I mean, I got Uranus on the ascendant. Like I'm intimately connected with this planet.
My mom also has that.
No, really. I'll have to pick your brain later. But having it come around and like activate the angles and be
Yeah.
it's a roller coaster ride, and obviously partnership is involved.
Hmm.
Um, but it's very interesting too, just being in fixed signs, like because there is disruption there, but it's also this very concretized place of
Yeah.
Scorpio and Taurus. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it though, because I want to do a podcast about this sometime. I'd love to bring a panel on of some people that have been through some midlife transits,
Yeah.
because there's no going back from this point. I mean, obviously can't turn back time, but these are defining life transits
Yeah.
to go through, and I am in the midst of it. um and but to see signatures like this come up that activate it, it's like, once again, it's like, of course, universe, how much can you give me with this? So I'll report back, people. I'll let you know how that goes. But looking ahead, I'm like, whew, get ready. um
I would like to hear the update personally.
yeah. Usually. All right, it will happen. It will happen. So yeah, bookmark your calendars. June 10th, 11th, 12th, especially that 11th. We have Venus, Uranus in town, and the moon activating that up.
And we're
So
hitting
now we
the
move
streets.
ahead to Mercury ingressing back into Gemini. And I feel like we've done a treatment on that to some extent. On June 13th, we've kind of talked about how Mercury is going to get back to its zone. It's picking up
Mhm.
speed. It kind of knows what it's doing to some extent.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
think it's gonna
so
be really nice. I think it's gonna feel very good. It might be a little bit chaotic, I've been noticing Mercury and Gemini. I'm like, oh right, I'm so distracted. So there might be some of that, but I just think it's going to feel good to have such a, healthy Mercury with pretty much only only, helpful aspects, which is to say, pretty much the only aspect worth mentioning at this point.
Yeah.
When Mercury is in early Gemini, is the sextile, the applying sextile to
Sextile to
Jupiter, which
Jupiter.
will
Yeah.
which will build.
It's building, it's coming. It's so interesting that Mercury just squeaks on into Gemini just in time for the Sagittarius full moon on June 14th on Tuesday. Because now the sun is backed by its, ruling planet back at the same degree it had the Cazimi when Gemini season started. So it's
Mhm.
interesting to have this full lunation, a loud lunation. I feel like this is a party lunation. It's definitely a party lunation since it's T square to Neptune. Let's just say, like watch those don't take in too much, don't drink and drive, because it's so here we have again like life and its paradoxical information. It's like here we have this bright Mercury, it's in Gemini. It's like, all right, I'm getting my speed back, I'm like back in my territory. And then we have a full moon square Neptune. It's like, wait, how about the certainty? What? Yeah, so I mean,
I'm just glad
thoughts
that
on
Mercury's
this?
not. Yeah, I'm just glad Mercury's not caught up in the Neptune yet.
Yet,
I like when
yet.
Mercury has a little independence from
Yeah.
some of the crazy stuff that's going on. Yeah, I just feel like this full moon is, it has the sext, the moon has the sextile to Saturn, Sun trine Saturn,
Yeah.
um,
It's a Saturn
which
Neptune
is,
piece again.
yeah, and I think the Saturn piece is, I'm not worried about it. It'll be constructive, I think, um, for the most part. But I feel like, if Saturn is kind of pushing you to like get something done, like, oh, you could do something really, really productive with this time or whatever. The Neptune thing is really throwing a wrench in that. And I just feel like it's better. This is a better time spent, just like spacing out or reading a book or
Absolutely.
having weird conversations that can go wherever they need to go. Um, so I was thinking it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier. We're like entertain the Mercury Jupiter
Mm,
at the beginning of Gemini season, where
hmm
this is kind of like, let the ideas of, whatever Saturn's influences here, let the ideas percolate, but don't like stress out too much about like doing something tangible with them, like in this moment. you know
Absolutely. Because I mean, we have a concentration of air, fire, and water. And then, but we have Venus and Uranus over there and Earth. But you think Venus and Uranus are trying to get things done? I don't, like, I don't think Venus is like, I need a break. Oh, geez. So I agree with you. Like, I feel, and of course, this is a Tuesday, right? So if you're working in type of normal work week, you might be like,
Yeah.
why isn't this a weekend aspect? But,
Yes.
um, yeah, I totally agree with you there. It's like entertain some ideas, percolate it, let it switch around. Don't imbibe too much. Don't get too serious, but don't get too loopy.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's interesting with Mars and Chiron conjunct just off in its own um space too if you're a Chiron follower. Mars and Chiron, it can be a little itchy scratchy and irritation kind of triggers. So it's just interesting to think of just having such a hotbed lunation, because I mean when we think about soapbox like that,
Mm,
this is a Sagittarius full moon, like this
yeah.
is a soapbox energy to me. Like I feel like this is like if you haven't heard the latest conspiracy theory,
Well,
I
yeah, I
feel
mean,
like this might be one.
I think that this whole all of Gemini season, it's like giving birth to the next round of information warfare. And
Yeah.
then, this is maybe the first time we get to really see it play out, whatever's been brewing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
although, yeah, there's multiple stories there. I feel like this is
There's
like,
definitely multiple stories there,
I
literally.
just think this is pretty much a repeat of, like, it doesn't the former president have his sun and moon pretty much
Yes.
exactly here.
Yes.
This
I
is
think
like
it's off
a
by like
repeat.
1 degree.
Yeah, this is like a repeat of his natal chart right here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, expect that.
suggests that he might be in the news.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe Elon Musk will let him back on Twitter on June 14th.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, and even talking about that, like, the big hot spot of like, Musk taking over Twitter and like these social platforms. I think these are things that are going to be in in the
Yeah,
news as well too.
definitely.
Like what can we talk about? It will be talked about now. Like that's essentially, and so just prepare for information overload, especially with Mercury at 0 degrees Gemini, because that is a reality. But we might not know the truth of everything. There might be some murkiness with that Neptune. There's probably a lot of people who are going to be like easily acting like authorities on something with that Saturn trine, like Saturn's like,
Mhm.
I know what this is talking about, but Neptune's at the same time is like, do we have all the information? Is it, like Mars is gonna square me later, we're gonna go
It's
back
so
over
funny
this. Yeah.
you say that. I have this note for myself. It's about these aspects. It says, "Is it a good or bad day to be king? Maybe both. Authority tries to reassert itself, but runs into a wall of mist." So,
Okay,
but I
well,
feel like that was just for my own kind of
that's exactly,
strange
I
thinking,
think
but
you
that's
just
exactly what you're saying.
I think you just summed up the full moon perfectly. Yeah, so just be aware of that when we're with this going on, but also have a good time because you know what? This is playful energy too, to some extent too. So, and sometimes we have to, when there's a lot going on in the world, there's a lot coming at us, information, like talk, like sometimes we just need to like shake it off and just have some
Mhm.
social time and just be silly or playful or not care for a second. It's okay.
Especially with everything that's going on and the
Yeah.
amount that we will be carrying.
And the amount that we will be carrying and carrying.
Yeah.
So June 14th, and this continues on because what's going to happen is the sun is then going to move into its exact trine with Saturn and exact sextile, or excuse me, square with Neptune on the 16th. They're like within like an hour or so of one another. They're pretty close in the day. So on
Yeah.
Thursday the 16th, we're carrying on this Saturn Neptune bit that we're talking about. So yeah,
Yeah. And
there's
the thing that I said about, good or bad day to be king was referring to
this in particular. Yeah.
this particular, yeah, because I was thinking about Saturn and the sun as, the two planets that represent authority, sort of executive authority and then paternalistic, disciplined traditional authority and rules, having this trine. But then, with the sun getting squared by Neptune, the sun is king.
It's
It's
sun
got
is
the backing
king.
of Saturn, but it's got to contend with that Neptune. So
Yeah. And that's sometimes you're just pawing at the on
the
at
wall of
nothing,
mist.
like or you're trying to create the structure, you're trying to, but at the same time, it's just like this tension of disillusion or degrade or illusion or fantasy or spectacle. Like imagine, a spectacle of power going on
Mhm,
where someone tries to assert or new ideas and it becomes like a big thing because Neptune is very spectacle like. You see it in a lot of
mhm,
sporting events, when there's just a vision to behold. So what is
mhm.
that? um
Yeah.
and then we get to decipher what we take from it, right? Because that's the interesting thing about Gemini and what we were talking about, perception and like having the spectacle before us. It's like asks 5 people on a street corner what they just saw and probably you're going to all be slightly different. So it kind of has that energy too, but that's kind of it's an interesting week really with that full moon in Sagittarius and then the sun just moving through Saturn and Neptune energy. So like we said in the beginning of like, this is we don't know, this is a study time, let's see how Neptune and Saturn interact with each other.
Yeah.
This is our learning position here. Now on a couple days later, we have, and so we're getting close to the end of Gemini season here.
Mhm.
And actually not even a couple days later. I had it
That
on the
day?
same day, on the same day, on the 16th, on that Thursday, we have Venus conjunct the North Node. So back again to like these women's issues, that we were talking about too, or maybe power, declaring, decreeing something with the air energy. But Venus over there, look at the moon. Look at the moon in Capricorn, just like, yep, I'm trying. So I feel like some Venus news is absolutely going to come out probably the morning on Thursday, having to do with some sort of like governmental structure or something like that. But this is always a pivotal placement. Anything that touches the North Node, there's some sort of like destiny laden moment to it. When we're talking about relationships and social interaction and balance and justice and things along those lines. So any
Hmm.
thoughts there?
I have nothing to add on that one.
Yeah. Well, and so back to our Venus or our Saturn Neptune experiment. Venus
Hmm.
is going to conjunct the North Node on the 16th, but then she goes on to the 18th on that Saturday to square Saturn and make a sextile to Neptune.
Yeah.
So Venus is now doing this dance too, but has the Saturn tension, which reminds
Yeah.
me of the sextile earlier that led to the Pluto action in in the first week of
Mhm.
Gemini season. And now so we have this kind of commitment structure tension
Yeah.
going on with Venus.
I would say in the time that I've been paying attention to astrology at like a very close level, which is not, to be fair, not super long, but in that time period, I've never been more aware of Venus coming in and out of really like major challenges. Like, I think it might just be a sensitivity to it, but and also just having that whole Aquarius period, which was pretty rough for Venus. But
Yeah.
here we go yet again. Venus running into some wild stuff um, with this Saturn square, and then these other aspects. So yeah,
Look at
it's
the moon. Sorry.
and then and then the
The
moon
moon's
is
on Saturn
always
in
there.
Aquarius.
The moon is always there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks like it's like those who have managed to use this time of Venus in Taurus to enjoy themselves. It's like they might run into some obstacles at this point with the Saturn square.
Yeah.
Um,
The reality. But it's
and
also
Saturn is
like
in the superior position.
exactly. Saturn's in the superior position. It's interesting because they're both in domicile. Both planets
Yeah,
are in domicile. Saturn's superior, plus it's got the moon lighting it up. To
yeah,
me, this seems like distance, like I think relational distance, especially in your own lives, like you might like it could be tests of commitment, but it also could be tests of just space. Like, okay, I've had like I need a little bit of space here. Saturn
yeah,
takes over. Or sometimes you get space because your loved one has a commitment that they can't get out of, or like something, and you're
right.
just separated at that time. It doesn't have to be something too serious. I mean, Saturn is also retrograde too, so there could be just processing of Venus with just all the tensions of Saturn that she's been with and feeling the weight of Saturn, and she just might feel a little down and want to be with herself a little bit and kind of Neptune out to some extent. Maybe to do some like creative activities. I feel like a good outlet would be connect with your creative self, maybe work on a project or
Hmm.
even build one too if you're trying to get a creative project going and need some structure. Saturn will test you, but I think
Yeah.
there's activating energy there too. So
Something
yeah.
that I haven't brought up yet, but I learned last night
Oh.
was that because I was thinking about all of this, there's so many hits at like 24, 25, 26 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. And I noticed last night, and I was sort of wished I could unsee it. So sorry to all you listeners, um, that I never looked closely at the EU chart before, but
Mm.
the EU chart has a Mars Pluto conjunction at 24 degrees Scorpio with
Oh.
the moon at 24 degrees Taurus. And
Oh.
so now I guess I'll just add as an interpretive layer that this is, the chart of the treaty that codified the EU, right? It's not like the chart of Europe as a whole, and all of the people of Europe, right? It's about the governmental body that for the European Union. But I just feel like this will be an interesting time. Obviously, it's a really profoundly challenging time. It's also the Saturn return of the EU is what we're witnessing right now. So with this Saturn retrograde, um, it's moving backwards for its second hit of the Saturn return. Um, so I think all of these astrological events that are around those degrees are going to really be impacting that chart, and that's, I think, going to be something really major to witness.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the other thing that I see with Venus and Taurus is just, with all the supply issues that have been happening, like Venus is
Mm-hmm.
here representing sort of like goods from like a market
Yeah.
standpoint. And so I honestly, I'm mostly curious, and I don't know what it's going to mean for Saturn to be in her home sign, with regard to that kind of issue that's playing out. Is that going to be what we talked about earlier, like stabilization, or is it going to be um, an attempt at stabilization? Is it going to be strength, or is it just going to call more attention to that problem?
That's
None of
true.
these options would really surprise me. Um,
Well, and when you were saying that, I started to think about kind of like Mercury's journey there and retrograding back through it, and him having to, Mercury looking to Venus. And
mm,
because Mercury is the planet of transaction, basically, like that is the good seller, the good like that
right,
is where
right,
that
right.
happens. And especially with it slowing down, it being backward, like backwards for having how long going through those Pluto, Neptune, Saturn placements that we were talking about. And so it could absolutely be that, like, Venus can only do so much. And but I mean, Mercury's back in its domicile here. I'd like to say that helps, but that could also just increase demand when there's no supply. So that's a thing too. And it's hard to say, but like what you pointed out about the EU chart, I think that is very important to note, especially as because we are in the last days of Gemini here now. We are headed towards solstice. We're headed to another cardinal point. Cardinal points are important parts of the zodiac, and when they are activated, they're typically world event triggers too. So to
Mhm.
have this kind of lead up into that, with really, the last, we're closing out the season with the last pass of Mercury to Jupiter there, that's sextile, but we also have Venus right before the solstice, like hours before the solstice, and it's going to be in the solstice chart, that Venus trine to Pluto too, which could speak to what you're talking about, like the changes and, well, government and supply demand, how are we stabilizing that, what do we need to do, etc. So I kind of agree with you on the fact, especially at this last like little throw of like just goods and transactions and something being sorted through or blocked there
Mhm.
too.
What you said about demand, I'm looking at now I'm looking at Venus conjunct the North Node a little differently.
Mm,
Just like, because the North Node is a very hungry
that's
kind
right.
of energy,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's like
Keeps eating.
keeps eating.
It's hungry.
Hungry. So there's this very intense demand, like Taurian demand for goods and for food, because that's the other thing, I brought up at the beginning. I brought up a while ago is the questions about food supply and
Yeah.
whatnot. This looks like a point where maybe demand starts to catch up with supply, right? Venus on the North Node square Saturn. Ugh.
Yep.
Obviously, we've
Yep.
already been living through that, but I just mean in an amplified way.
And I mean, look at the same degree, right? We're
Yeah,
back to the same
exactly.
degree of the eclipse of the, of also algal, like
Right, right. I mean, this is all
there's
stuff where
difficulty there.
I don't want to be morbid, but
No. But you know what? There's a thing between being morbid and there's also a thing of being prepared. And I think, being
yeah.
prepared is important. And, you don't have to take it too far, but knowing ahead of time, prepping yourself, getting why you can, like, you don't have to be like a doomsday packer and have like a whole bunch, or I mean, you can like do you,
Do
uh,
you. You do
do
you.
you. But yeah, so it could be a good time just to stock up where you can, where you need to, and just being proactive
We're gonna
there.
single-handedly cause the supply demand
That,
problem
yes,
by
this
telling everybody to stock up.
podcast,
This podcast is
they're
gonna
like, what?
result.
They're like, it all originated in Energetic Principles podcast when they said there's going to be a supply shortage on. Yeah. So yeah. Well, anyways, we have said enough about Gemini season.
Yeah,
I think
I
there's,
think so.
but of course, and this is the biggest challenge of the program, and especially for Gemini season. If you had one word to describe Gemini season 2022, what would it be?
I think I might change this or have a better idea later, but I feel like flux,
Mm, it's a good one.
it's mutable. It
It's
always
mutable.
works.
It covers the
I don't think that it does it justice, but you know,
maybe it does.
maybe it does.
Maybe it
Influx, really, is what I mean.
influx. Well, outflux. I like
I mean,
flux.
things are in flux.
In influx.
Yeah,
Not one word. Two words. That's
two
two
words.
words.
Sorry. That's
No,
why.
no, don't break my rules.
That's why I brought it down to flux because I didn't want to break your rule.
Flux. I think that's a great word. I think, um, God, do I even have a word? I don't even know if I have a word. I have to come up with one, but if I just got patience. That was my word,
Hmm.
which is interesting, but kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes sense, I guess, with the Mercury
Mm-hmm.
retrograde and Taurus
In
component.
Taurus, square Saturn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
patience will be required, especially
yeah,
because the sun is waiting. The sun is like, hello. And Mercury is like, sorry, wait, hold on.
I'm not ready yet. I'm not done. I need to think
Yeah.
some more. Yeah. So we got flux and patience. And you know what? You gotta be patient when you're in flux, not influx, but flux. Yeah, because things are changing. And that's just the way it is. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, Jared, I think we did a good treatment. Tell people, where can they find you? What do you got going on?
Yeah. So you can find me. I have a website. It's mercuriousgeorge.com. I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you can see how that's spelled.
Yes.
And then I'm also, on Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter as Mercurius George. That's where I will be more active, except on Wednesdays when I try to take a day off. Um, and
Mercury's Day.
Mercury's Day as a little gift um, to my brain. Uh,
Yep.
and then also on Instagram, Mercurius George Astrology. And I'm available for readings, though not a ton. I do a couple a week. I have other things. I try not to let astrology take over my entire life, but it's hard.
It's a good rule of thumb. It's a good
Yeah.
rule of thumb. So, all right. Well, I will share all your information over at my website at energeticprinciples.com. There will be a blog post for this episode, of course. And if you want to find me on Instagram and socials, you can find me at Energetic Principles. Also, I have my monthly newsletter, The Heavenly Wind, that goes out once a month at the beginning of the month that breaks down all the transits. So come on over and sign up for that on the front page of my website and get it to your inbox there. I almost forgot. I guess I'll say this in the beginning of the program too, but I'm going to be joining Stormy Grace. I'll be the first returning teacher for the YouTube Academy year 2 to go back over my dignities and debilities episode. It wasn't an episode, but it's a class that I taught on her YouTube Academy last year. And so there will be a link to watch it in the podcast description here. And then I'll be back on May 25th. I think it's May 25th. Am I got that right? At 11 a.m. Mountain Time, which is 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, to answer questions on that class. So come ask me questions about dignities, debilities, about the class, things you got to add, whatever you'd like to do. Just show up, hang out with me and Stormy, and we'll answer your questions. So, all right, what other directives do I have for you? Share the podcast, share it with a friend, spread the good word, leave a review wherever you listen to it or watch it, comment on the feed on YouTube, whatever feels good to you. I always like to hear how people are receiving the program. Whoa, lost my earbud. I only got half of it now. And what else? I don't think there's anything else to share there. So I'm just going to thank you once again, Jared, for joining me. It was a pleasure getting to chat all things Gemini with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Oh, great. Well, I hope to have you back on another day. And we wish you all the best of luck out there in this very active and interesting Gemini season. And as always, may the stars be with you.